In the summer of 1683, as the sun set over Europe, 150,000 Ottoman soldiers stood before Vienna's gates, one final push away from rewriting the map of the continent. In the summer of 1683, Vienna was not merely a city under siege, it was the pressure point of two empires. To understand the drama, we must strip the story to its strategic bones. Who held the advantages, who carried fatal flaws, and how their choices shaped Europe's fate. Ottoman strengths and blind spots. On paper, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa commanded an overwhelming force, perhaps 150,000 soldiers, including Janissary infantry famed for discipline, Sipahi cavalry expert at flanking maneuvers, and 40,000 Crimean Tatars whose raids cleared paths and spread terror. The Ottomans also carried a centuries-long reputation of unstoppable advance. They had taken Constantinople, crushed Hungary, and reached deep into the Balkans. But reputation can be a double-edged sword. Mustafa's overconfidence led him to bypass key forts, leaving hostile pockets behind him. To preserve Vienna's wealth for himself, he delayed an all-out assault and fatally left most heavy siege cannons in Hungary to hasten his march. That choice crippled his ability to breach Vienna's bastions quickly. Strategically, this mirrors modern leaders who underestimate small obstacles. Consider Napoleon in 1812 dismissing Russian winter, or, outside military history, tech executives who ignore minor competitors until they dominate a market. Kara Mustafa's neglect of logistical realities foreshadowed disaster. The defenders' fragile walls and iron will. Vienna's garrison numbered only about 15,000, regulars and militia, under Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Their strengths lay not in numbers, but in fortifications and discipline. Starhemberg, a seasoned field marshal, understood that morale would decide the battle as much as stone walls. He kept strict watch rotations, even issuing orders to shoot any sentry found asleep, a grim necessity to keep exhaustion from opening the gates. The city's weaknesses were obvious: thin manpower, dwindling food and disease. Dysentery and starvation became as deadly as Ottoman cannons. Yet the Viennese turned adversity into cohesion. Citizens, including women and children, repaired walls nightly under bombardment. Like defenders at Masada or the Marines at Chosin Reservoir centuries later, their determination became a force multiplier. Psychological warfare and espionage. The siege was fought underground as much as above. Ottoman sappers tunneled toward the walls to plant mines. Viennese engineers countermined, sometimes clashing in suffocating darkness with pistols and shovels. The famous spy George Kulsiki, disguised in Ottoman garb, slipped through enemy lines to relay messages, proof that intelligence and daring can offset raw numbers. This is a lesson echoed in countless contexts. Small, agile information networks can shift momentum. In business or politics, a single well-placed insight can outweigh massive budgets or armies. Kara Mustafa's strategic errors compound. By early September, with Vienna's defenses near collapse, Mustafa prepared a final massive mine. But he failed to secure the Vienna woods, dense hills north of the city. Obsessed with the siege, he dismissed the threat of a relief army threading through difficult terrain. That oversight allowed King Jan Sobieski and the Holy League to march undetected onto the Kahlenberg Heights. Historians often compare this miscalculation to other infamous blind spots, like General Cornwallis ignoring French fleets at Yorktown, or business giants who neglect emerging technologies. The relief armies calculated risk. Sobieski, leading some 80,000 coalition troops, faced choices: cut Ottoman supply lines or strike directly. German commanders favored caution. Sobieski argued for boldness, knowing Vienna would not last. His decision to gamble on a frontal assault was a masterclass in reading momentum. a reminder that sometimes the riskiest move is inaction. Leaders from Lincoln to modern COs, like Satya Nadella, have shown similar instincts. When delay guarantees decline, decisive action, taken with clear eyes, becomes the safer path. Comparative strengths at dawn. On September 12th, as Ottoman troops launched what they expected to be the final assault on the city, the coalition quietly assembled above them. The Ottomans were stretched thin. Elite janissaries bogged down in trenches, cavalry scattered, morale shaken by weeks of attrition. The coalition, though outnumbered, held high ground, surprise, and unity of purpose, advantages that can outweigh raw numbers, as seen again at Agincourt or Midway. Tactical thinking in motion. The battle unfolded as grinding infantry combat through the day. By late afternoon, Ottoman lines frayed. Sobieski unleashed 18,000 cavalry, the largest mounted charge in history, led by 3,000 Polish Winged Hussars whose feathered frames clattered like thunder. This psychological shock broke the Ottoman center. Eyewitnesses described the charge's sound as a thunderbolt. In leadership terms, this was the decisive stroke, a bold move timed to exploit weakness, much like Eisenhower's D-Day gamble or bold corporate turnarounds when markets waver. Human dimensions, pride and protocol, even in victory, human ego-shaped events. Emperor Leopold's frosty reception of Sobieski, who had just saved his capital, reminds us that pride can strain alliances even in triumph. Such frictions echo through history. Coalition politics in World War II or modern geopolitical partnerships, where shared victories don't erase rivalries. Positivity amid carnage. Amid suffering, small acts of hope kept Vienna alive. Rockets fired nightly as signals, citizens singing hymns while repairing breaches. This is a reminder that symbols and morale matter. Just as Churchill's speeches buoyed Britain or Malala's words rallied millions, gestures of faith and courage can stiffen spines when walls crack. Lessons in strength and weakness. The Battle of Vienna teaches that numbers and prestige can crumble under poor logistics, arrogance, and underestimating an enemy's resilience. Conversely, unity, timely intelligence, and audacious leadership can reverse near certain defeat. The siege wasn't merely a clash of cannons. It was a test of mental fortitude, from Starhemberg's unyielding discipline to Sobieski's calculated gamble. In every field, business, politics, personal life, the same dynamics play out. A superior opponent who grows complacent becomes vulnerable. A smaller force that stays organized, gathers allies, and times its strike can prevail. Vienna's walls, battered but unbroken, remain a monument to that truth. As dawn broke on September 11th, 1683, Vienna's defenders were gaunt shadows of themselves. Bread rations were gone, horses had been eaten, and dysentery ravaged the garrison. Yet the night sky still flashed with signal rockets from St. Stephen's Cathedral, pleas for salvation that seemed almost symbolic now. Far beyond the besieging trenches, King Jan III Sobieski pushed his exhausted Polish Hussars through the Vienna woods. The Holy League, Bavarian, Saxon, and Imperial contingents struggled on muddy tracks carved between pines and limestone cliffs. Mustafa had dismissed this rugged route as impassable for a large army, a mistake akin to Cornwallis ignoring the French fleet or a modern corporation ignoring a startup, disrupting their market. Sobieski understood time was a weapon. Every day's delay was a day closer to Vienna's surrender. In letters to his queen, he wrote with quiet determination, mixing devotion with strategic clarity, "God and Our Lady will save this city through our arms." His decision to risk the forest march was audacity born of necessity, like Eisenhower gambling on a break in the weather for D-Day. The Ottoman camp below, Kara Mustafa's encampment sprawled like a city, silken pavilions, market stalls, even bathhouses. His arrogance showed in the splendor of his command tent, gold embroidery, Persian carpets, and fountains gurgling as if the siege were already won. But inside the trenches, Janissaries were bone-tired, supplies were thin, and morale frayed. Mustafa's refusal to allow full-scale plunder until Vienna fell had bred resentment among his men. Overconfidence was calcifying into doubt. September 12th, the battle unfolds. At dawn, Ottoman troops launched what they believed would be the final push into Vienna. Cannon smoke drifted over shattered bastions, and Starhemberg's battered garrison braced for collapse. Then, from the ridges of the Kahlenberg, the glint of steel caught the rising sun. The relief army had arrived. All morning, brutal infantry clashes chewed through the wooded slopes. Bavarian and Imperial troops pressed the Ottoman flanks, while Polish units maneuvered for position. The terrain, Mustafa's neglected shield, now worked against him. His elite forces were stuck in siege trenches facing Vienna, unable to pivot quickly. By mid-afternoon, Sobieski surveyed the field. He saw the Ottomans stretched and wavering. With a prayer and a cry, "God is our protector," he ordered the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. 18,000 horsemen thundered downhill, 3,000 winged hussars at the spear point, their wooden frames and eagle feathers rattling like thunder. Eyewitnesses described the ground trembling, the air roaring. The Ottomans broke. Mustafa fled, carrying only the Prophet's sacred banner to avoid its capture. Cultural ripples and political awkwardness. When Emperor Leopold returned, etiquette spoiled triumph. Instead of embracing Sobieski, he greeted him coldly, offended that a king might overshadow an emperor. The awkwardness was almost comic. Two men whose egos nearly eclipsed the salvation of Europe. Such moments remind us that human pride often complicates even shared victories. Think of de Gaulle and Eisenhower sparring over credit in World War II, or rival tech companies squabbling after joint ventures succeed. Legends blossomed in the victory's aftermath. Stories claimed Kulsiki opened Vienna's first coffee house, using beans abandoned by the fleeing Ottomans, giving birth to a culture that still defines the city. The crescent-shaped croissant supposedly commemorated the broken Ottoman crescent. While historians debate these tales, they endure because people crave symbols, small, tangible reminders that even dark nights can end sweetly. Geopolitical shockwaves. Strategically, the Battle of Vienna was more than a rescue. It marked the Ottoman Empire's last great offensive into Europe. The Habsburgs, emboldened, pushed into Hungary and the Balkans. Within decades, Ottoman influence west of the Danube receded. Europe's power balance tilted toward Vienna, and the myth of Ottoman invincibility shattered. For European Christians, the victory fed a narrative of divine favor. For the Ottomans, it exposed systemic problems. Logistics stretched thin, Janissary discipline eroding, and leadership crippled by court intrigues. In modern terms, Vienna 1683 was a case study in how empires can falter when pride blinds them to changing realities. Lessons beyond the battlefield. From boardrooms to personal struggles, Vienna's story echoes. Timely allies matter. Just as Vienna needed Poland, even strong individuals need networks. Terrain and logistics trump reputation. A trusted brand or past victories don't guarantee future success. Decisive leadership counts. Sobieski's willingness to risk everything, like Mandela's choice for reconciliation or Satya Nadella's push to reinvent Microsoft, shows courage in action can reshape history. Symbols sustain morale. Whether rockets fired from a cathedral or a croissant in a cafe, symbols can carry hope through darkness. The siege's smoke has long cleared, but its lessons remain etched into Europe's memory and into every situation where resilience, humility, and bold action decide the outcome. As the dust settled over Kahlenberg's slopes, Vienna was a city transformed. The starving defenders, once certain of doom, now roamed an abandoned Ottoman camp stacked with gold, silk, and weapons. For a week, the spoils were gathered, evidence of how quickly power can shift. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa fled toward Belgrade with only the Prophet's sacred banner, hoping to salvage some honor. But in Istanbul, the court's patience was gone. Rivals whispered, and Sultan Mehmed IV could not ignore a failure so catastrophic. On Christmas Day, 1683, Kara Mustafa was executed by strangulation with a silk cord, a chilling reminder that empires punish hubris as swiftly as they reward triumph. For the Habsburgs and their allies, Vienna's salvation was a springboard. Within decades, the Ottomans were pushed out of Hungary and much of the Balkans. The Holy League, once a fragile coalition, had proven that desperate unity could overturn a superior foe. It was the same principle Winston Churchill would later voice: "There is nothing more exhilarating than to be shot at without result," capturing the strange energy that survival can give. Vienna's victory also left cultural echoes. The city's coffeehouse culture, whether born from abandoned beans or not, became a symbol of refined discussion and intellectual life. But beyond legends, the real treasure was the shift in European identity, a renewed belief that cooperation and decisive action could secure the continent's future. The battle's political awkwardness, Leopold's cold reception of Sobieski, reminds us that pride and protocol can sour even shared victories. Modern history is full of such moments. Roosevelt and Stalin jostling for post-war influence, or companies that quarrel after a joint project success. Pride, unchecked, is as dangerous as any army. Leadership lessons are equally enduring. Sobieski's bold strike recalls Franklin D. Roosevelt betting on Lend-Lease before Pearl Harbor, or Angela Merkel taking decisive steps during Europe's refugee crisis, acts that risked criticism but preserved long-term stability. Starhemberg's grit under starvation parallels frontline leaders everywhere who sustain morale when resources run dry. The core message persists. Strength alone is fragile without humility, and even the most desperate defense can hold if unity and courage guide it. Vienna's battered but unbroken walls remain a monument, not just to victory, but to the idea that arrogance can doom the mighty and bold resolve can save the doomed. When the smoke cleared, Vienna was no longer just a saved city. It was a pivot point that reshaped Central Europe. The Habsburg monarchy, emboldened by victory, pushed eastward. Within decades, Hungarian plains and much of the Balkans were wrested from Ottoman control. The Treaty of Karlowitz, 1699, would formalize a shift. Ottoman expansion into Western Europe was permanently halted. In Istanbul, the defeat unleashed political tremors. Kara Mustafa's execution sent a message that imperial arrogance could not go unpunished. Factional struggles weakened the central authority of Sultan Mehmed IV. From this point forward, the empire's European ambitions shrank, its focus turning inward to reform and survival. For Central Europe, Vienna's salvation reinforced the idea of a shared European identity. The Holy League's cooperation, Polish, Bavarian, Saxon, and Imperial, proved that even fractured powers could unite under existential threat. This principle would echo in later eras: coalitions against Napoleonic France, the Grand Alliance of World War II, even modern defense pacts. Culturally, Vienna began to flourish as a cosmopolitan center. The city rebuilt its battered walls and, with renewed pride, invested in arts, music, and intellectual salons. Its coffeehouses, whether or not founded on abandoned beans, became crucibles of Enlightenment thought, shaping European culture for centuries. But the cost was heavy. Thousands of civilians across Hungary, Austria, and the Balkans perished from famine, disease, and raiding. Villages burned by Tatars or emptied by forced labor left scars visible for generations. The battle's memory, though often wrapped in glory, was also a reminder of war's human toll. Vienna 1683 did not end conflict between East and West, but it ended one chapter. The Ottomans would never again stand at Europe's gates. The siege's legacy is not only a story of salvation, but also a testament to discipline under pressure, unity in crisis, and humility in victory. Vienna 1683 was not only a story of heroism, it was a textbook demonstration of warfare mechanics stripped to their core. Intelligence determined tempo. Rockets fired nightly from St. Stephen's Cathedral signaled for help, and George Kulsicki's missions through enemy lines carried hope beyond the walls. These small acts of information kept a starving city from despair. Kara Mustafa failed to guard the Vienna woods, an operational blind spot born of arrogance. Fixated on the siege trenches, he lost awareness of the wider battle space, an error that left the high ground to his enemies. Siegecraft was brutal science. Ottoman engineers dug zigzag trenches, planted mines, and battered walls with light artillery. Yet the absence of heavy siege guns, left behind to speed the march, turned a swift assault into a grinding contest. The longer the siege stretched, the more variables entered: disease, hunger, and the chance of relief forces. Beneath the city, Viennese counterminers fought by torchlight in choking tunnels, proving that engineering skill and determination can equalize overwhelming force. Logistics shaped morale. Ottoman supply lines spanned the Balkans, relying on plunder and long caravans. Mustafa's ban on premature looting, meant to preserve Vienna's riches, starved his men of rewards and eroded their will. Inside the city, Count Starhemberg's iron discipline turned scarcity into resolve. Watch rotations were rigid, and any sentry caught sleeping faced execution. Victory depended not just on bread or powder, but on psychological endurance. Command decisions sealed fates. Mustafa centralized authority and hesitated to redeploy his janissaries when the relief army approached. The Holy League, despite early disagreements, granted unified command to Jan Sobieski at the critical moment, transforming disparate contingents into a single, coordinated strike force. Terrain became a force multiplier. The hills of Kahlenberg, dismissed as impassable, offered observation points, downhill momentum for cavalry, and psychological dominance. Geography, often overlooked, became the quiet ally of the defenders and their rescuers. Combined arms delivered the killing blow. Through the morning of September 12th, infantry fighting pinned the Ottoman lines. By afternoon, they frayed. Sobieski unleashed 18,000 cavalry, 3,000 of them winged hussars, down the slopes. Speed, slope, and the terrifying rattle of feathered frames shattered Ottoman cohesion. A numerically superior army collapsed under the weight of surprise and shock. Human willpower remained the final ingredient. Vienna's citizens patched walls under fire, sang hymns through hunger, and believed salvation would come. Ottoman soldiers, denied plunder and drained by a drawn-out siege, watched confidence turn to doubt. In simple words, the combination of terrain, time, unified command, and a timely shock proved stronger than sheer numbers, past reputation, and a prolonged siege. Vienna's story reminds us that strength without flexibility is brittle, and discipline, timing, and morale can overturn seemingly certain defeat. The Battle of Vienna stands alongside other pivotal sieges and turning points, not as an isolated miracle, but as part of a repeating pattern in warfare. By comparing it to other campaigns, we can expose enduring truths about strategy, leadership, and human endurance. 1. Malta 1565, controlling the approach. In 1565, the Ottoman fleet besieged the island of Malta, confident that sheer numbers would crush the Knights Hospitaller. Like Vienna, Malta was defended by a small but disciplined garrison. The Ottoman failure at Malta, caused by overextended supply lines and fierce local resistance, mirrors Mustafa's overconfidence in 1683. Both show that geography and determination can blunt overwhelming force. Malta's coastal terrain and sea supply lines played the role that Kahlenberg's hills and Vienna's walls did a century later. Difficult approaches can turn invaders' strength into vulnerability. 2. Khotin 1621. The power of containment. The Battle of Khotin, fought between Polish-Lithuanian forces and the Ottomans, prefigured Vienna. At Khotin, entrenched defenders stalled a larger Ottoman army, proving that time can be a weapon. But unlike Vienna, Khotin ended in a negotiated stalemate rather than a decisive break. Vienna succeeded because Sobieski combined containment with a crushing counterstrike, evidence that delay must be paired with decisive action. 3. Stalingrad 1942–43. Encirclement and attrition. 3 centuries later, Stalingrad echoed Vienna's lessons. The German obsession with taking a symbolic city trapped them in an urban grinder, just as the Ottomans were fixed before Vienna's walls. The Soviet counteroffensive Operation Uranus resembled the Holy League's flanking maneuver, striking where the enemy was weakest after they had committed too deeply. Both battles show how stubborn offensives can become traps. 4. Agincourt and Midway, underdogs with timing. Agincourt 1415 and Midway 1942 remind us that underdogs who seize timing and terrain can upend empires. Like Henry V using mud and longbows, or the U.S. Navy using intelligence and surprise, Vienna's defenders and Sobieski exploited opportunities rather than brute force. 5. Lessons across centuries. Across Malta, Khotin, Stalingrad, and Vienna, patterns emerge. Overconfidence blinds commanders. Logistics and geography outlast reputation. Delay without decisive follow-up achieves only stalemate. Unified command and timing turn desperate defenses into victories. These comparisons do not reduce Vienna's uniqueness. They reveal its universality. The city's salvation belongs to a lineage of moments when disciplined defense, bold counterattacks, and the land itself reshaped history. The Battle of Vienna did not end with the clash of sabers or the thunder of cavalry. It lives on in the way people remember, debate, and retell it. To understand Vienna fully, we must examine not just the battle, but the narratives it spawned and the responsibilities of those who recount them. 1. Competing national narratives. In Poland and Lithuania, Jan III Sobieski is hailed as the savior of Europe and Christendom, the heroic king who led the Winged Hussars into legend. In Austria, Count Starhemberg and Vienna's citizen defenders are celebrated for endurance under impossible odds. In Turkey, historians frame the siege as a product of logistical overreach and court intrigue rather than a moral failure, reminding us that the Ottoman Empire was a complex, multi-ethnic polity, not a monolithic villain. These differing lenses show how history serves identity and politics. 2. Academic debates and myths. Historians still debate the numbers. Was the Ottoman army truly 150,000? Was Sobieski's cavalry charge the largest in history? These disputes matter less than the underlying dynamics: supply lines, timing, morale. Myths, like the croissant's supposed origin, survive because people crave symbols, but responsible historians separate legend from fact while acknowledging why legends endure. 3. Avoiding the clash of civilizations trap. It is tempting to portray Vienna 1683 as a simple Christian-Muslim showdown. In truth, alliances were fluid. France covertly encouraged Ottoman pressure to weaken the Habsburgs. The Ottomans themselves included Christian vassals and diverse ethnic groups. Reducing Vienna to religious binaries erases the political and economic forces at play. History's complexity is what makes it instructive. 4. The human cost and ethical reflection. Tens of thousands of civilians suffered, villages burned, families enslaved or displaced, disease spreading through camps. Remembering Vienna responsibly means acknowledging those lives, not just the glory of cavalry charges. War is not a game of symbols. It is paid for in human anguish. 5. Lessons for today's world. Vienna's story warns against arrogance in power and complacency in defense. It demonstrates the value of cooperation across borders and faiths when faced with existential threats. And it reminds storytellers, whether historians, filmmakers, or educators, that history's power lies in its nuance. Oversimplification breeds division. Honest complexity breeds understanding. Vienna 1683's legacy is not only the salvation of a city, it is a call to humility, perspective, and shared humanity.